Hi, Travis.
Hey Peter, how are you?
Great. Good. Welcome to State of Play. Thanks for joining us. So basically, we're going to ask. Well, I'm going to have the pleasure of asking Travis a few questions, some easy ones, and maybe ones he wasn't expecting. But listen, just for people who don't know, Travis is the co-founder of Vela Games, who previously worked in Riot in Ireland and also other games companies. And uh, Vela Games, just for people who wouldn't be aware, they raised funding from, if you don't mind me saying, Travis, LVP, London Venture Partners,
Yep,
who
that's
are
right.
a very prestigious and very fussy uh, games and very astute games investment venture capitalists. So well done on getting that funding. And so Travis, yeah, look, we'll kick it off really. Just I suppose, you know, how did you get into games? And because we do, besides young developers, we have graduates here as well. So maybe just tell us a little about your journey into the games industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Peter. It's great to see State of Play going again. I've actually been several times in the audience, so it's nice
Oh,
to actually be talking this time. So my journey into games is probably not very atypical for this group. I grew up in the States, as you can tell from the accent, maybe. And I grew up really in the middle of nowhere, playing games my whole life. I would spend my Friday and Saturday nights, instead of going to parties, I would spend it in the basement playing StarCraft on a makeshift LAN in my friend's basement. And so that's pretty much what happened. I always knew that I wanted to work in technology somehow. And so I actually started my own technology company with those friends when I was 17, and actually did that for about 2 years before I had a really important revelation, which was I do not want to be in IT. And I thought that that's what I was going to do. And I thought, well, if this is my company and I get to work with my best friends, like, and I'm tired of it after 2 years, I better find something else to do. And so I just thought one day, like, somebody has to get paid to make video games, so why not me? So within 3 months of having that really important revelation, I had moved across the U.S. To the East Coast, and I went to game development school at a place called Full Sail. There were really only two places in the states that did game development at the time. One was DigiPen, and one was Full Sail. And so I did a game programming course. There wasn't even a design course at the time because it was either you were an artist or an engineer who also did design. So I did the programming course and had another important revelation, which was I hated programming. It really wasn't for me, but I finished said course, but I never actually applied for a programming job, much to the downside of my wallet. So I decided that I wanted to be in game design and just spent uh, a lot of time applying to any job that I thought was legit, and was really fortunate. I got a job at an Activision studio in San Francisco, so I moved across the country again, and started work as a level designer, and really started working in AAA big licensed console games. Did that for about 6 years. Shipped a Marvel game actually at the time, back before Marvel was super cool again. Um, and we had the very typical AAA publisher experience there. So my first gig, my lead designer and my senior designer were both fired within about 6 months, and I was the most senior person on the entire project on the design team for about a year. So that was a really great way to get thrown feet first into the fire. We shipped a game after about 4 years, and of course it was over budget and over scheduled. Sold 1.5 million copies, but Activision showed up and said, "Well, you needed to sell 2.5 million copies, so we're closing the studio." So that was kind of my first real experience in games. From there, I went on to work at a startup for about a year, and after that year, they ran out of money. So I had my very first startup experience where we ran out of money, and I found myself looking for another job. And at that point, I just was really frustrated with the industry. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I
mm,
think we should
mm,
normalize saying, like, this is a very hard industry for lots
mm,
of reasons.
mm,
Um, and I just wanted to work on a great game. And I didn't care what it was, I didn't care where it was. And I was willing to pretty much do any job. And I was really fortunate to get a job offer to go work as a designer at Bethesda. They were working on the Elder Scrolls Online and this thing they called Skyrim, which looked pretty good at the time,
Mhm.
back in 2008. And a former colleague of mine rang me, and he said, "Hey, I know you're about to take this other job, but there's an opportunity to be perfect for." And I said, "Well, okay, I'm not really interested, but tell me." And he said, "Well, it's another startup in Los Angeles, started by two guys who've never made games, and they're working on a game based on something called Dota." And I said, "I don't want to move to LA. I hate startups. Who are these guys, and what's a Dota?" Right?
Yeah.
And he said, "No, no, just come down and meet the team and play the demo, and we'll take you out to a nice dinner." And I said, "I'm going to tell you no. Like, I literally am going to turn down whatever job you give me." And they said, "No, no, just come." And I think they thought they would charm me. So, of course, I went to Riot Games. There were about 15 people on the team. I played their demo. They took me to a nice dinner. They made me an offer to be the lead designer, and I turned them down. And I said, "Nope, I told you I was going to say no." And the CEO at the time rang me, and I thought, oh, he's going to talk about all the money we're going to make and startups and equity, and I don't care about any of that. I just want to make a great game. And we ended up talking for about 3 hours just about games. We talked about like what would it be like to make a game that players actually wanted, that we responded to their feedback. What would it be like to make a game without a publisher, which I was really interested in. And we just talked to players. And then there's this really interesting thing called free to play, and it's typically only for like really bad games, or games where you like pay to win. Like, what if we just tried to make a really good game and not make it pay to win? And I said, all right, well, this is pretty interesting. I don't think it's going to work at all. So I'll work here for a year, and then after that, I'll go work at Bethesda. And so I ended up being at Riot for about 9 years, and actually hired the people who were trying to hire me from Bethesda. We hired them to Riot a few years later. So that was kind of the first half of my career in the game industry. And I always think of it as just a really important set of personal revelations about what I liked and what I didn't like along the way. So.
That was really, I mean, a really interesting one. I think at the very beginning you said, and be very kind of apt, even I'm thinking of students and experience as regards knowing things you don't like. You didn't want to be a programmer, and you were able to find your niche in the industry. I mean, that's a very common thing that
Yeah.
I come across with well, not just with students, but with different people in the industry. Um, yeah, Riot was. What was it like going from on the inside from, and I didn't realize when reading the two founders weren't gamers. Isn't that right?
Well, they were huge gamers,
Oh, were
but they
they
had never worked in the industry
as
directly.
developers?
So they
Yeah,
were,
sorry,
yeah,
they
they
were
were
gamers. Yeah,
huge
yeah,
gamers,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But they've never been developers. And so what happened was they started the company, they didn't really get a lot of traction, and they realized they needed to bring in some different groups of people. They needed to do some more development in-house because they were trying to outsource stuff. And so myself and several of my colleagues who started around that time had more kind of development experience. They kind of rebooted the development team, and so we came in, and it was a really interesting dynamic between these guys who like had a really clear vision of what they wanted, and what they thought would drive a great player experience, and a group of seasoned developers who, honestly, like it was a really like great but tense environment, because they would show up and they'd say, well, we need to release content every 2 weeks. And we would just look at them like, that's mad. Like, no one does that. Like, World of Warcraft was like the gold standard of content releases, and they release something every 2.5 months, and you want to do that 6 times faster. And they said, well, it'll drive engagement, it'll drive these things, we'll put out new characters. And we just kind of thought like, yeah, it would be great. No one's ever done it. So let's try to do it. And after we got over that kind of initial shock of like this crazy ask, we made it work. There were lots of bumps and we messed up a lot. But now, like, content is released on 2 weeks is slow for some companies, right?
Mm.
And so, it's just that type of dynamic, and those types of different perspectives were really, really valuable to making Riot successful. And so the guys, to their credit, like had a really strong vision for a lot of things, and it was a really good back and forth between kind of both sides of the fence there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the interesting thing I think with Riot as well, as you said, they self-published. They didn't have
Yeah, we
that
did. Yeah.
publisher and still was phenomenally successful. Did and going through that tremendous growth phase, I presume it was really rewarding but tough as well. I'd say, was it? I can
Yeah,
only
I think
imagine.
yeah, I think there were two big things that I learned from Riot. And the first is what you just mentioned, which is that the most important thing that you have as a developer is that direct relationship with your players, right? And that was one of the things that drew me to Riot, despite the fact that, honestly, we didn't have a huge chance of success. We made it work, but that relationship with players, I think, was really critical. And just the way we thought about the player relationship in general, like most companies didn't want you to talk to players at all, right? Most companies made a game and shipped it, and then hope players like it. And we just took those two things and really threw them on their head. And it worked,
Mm.
and of course it worked. And it's so obvious now. And, but it's just nobody was really taking that risk in the industry because I think the technical disruption of kind of like being able to like operate a live service kind of more reliably and kind of communication with like forums and things, like that was a little bit different and kind of a coming of age thing that kind of happened at the same time. And so it really, really stuck with me and the people at Vela now who've worked at Riot previously, which is like this player focus that like Riot talks about. And I can't speak for any other company. I know there's lots of companies who say it, but maybe don't do it. But if you really do it, it can lead to business success. Like we actively sat around and talked about like how can we give players more value, like more content, more things, and then we would figure out how to price it. Like the conversation was player led every time, right? And I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, I remember reading articles from other analysts in the industry of like, there's no way Riot can be making this much money, and like
Mm.
they're an outlier, and look at all this stuff. And we would read that, and we would actually be like, oh, we're actually they think there's no way we're making X. Well, we're actually making 4X what they think we're making, just because this like player relationship and this like player focus like was so rewarding for kind of both sides, like the company and the audience, right? And I haven't been there in 4 years. I haven't been in LA in about six, so I don't know how it is today, but I know that was really genuine and that was really important, right?
Mm.
And that's something that we actually carry over to Vela today, very unapologetically. Like it's like, yep, we learned this at Riot, and it is very true if you actually stick to it.
Mm.
It's easy to say and it's easy to do when things are going well. It's really hard to do when it's difficult, which it inevitably is in making games, as everybody in this audience knows, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting point that that's just even my career with working in a publisher and startups and in a games company and finding people who don't play games. I've even talked to friends of mine who are in the studio and they stop playing games. I said,
Yeah.
well, it's you lose that. If you can keep retain that, it's true. So, I mean, yeah. So, Vela, what prompted you and your fellow co-founders to leave probably a good number in Riot and go down the startup route?
Yeah. So for me personally, I actually left Riot before I knew what I was going to do. So I had worked there for 9 years. I spent 6 years in LA. I was the team lead for the project for about 3 years. If anybody plays lead from like season 2 through 5. Um, and that was the game's biggest growth phase. And I learned a lot about scaling an organization, and I made a lot of mistakes with my own time and like trying to like grow a game and like keep in touch with players and like grow a team and manage a team and work with a bunch of smart people who were smarter than me. And so that really was what led me to come to the European office, which is, I wanted to work in another office at Riot and try to make it great, right? And actually do more. So we started building a development team at Riot, et cetera. And so after about a year and a half of doing that here in Dublin, I had another important revelation, which is, my whole career is just marked with the series of those, which is I wanted to go build something again, and I wanted to build more than just a game. And so I actually left Riot, wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. And actually, to keep myself kind of busy, I did an MBA at Trinity College here in Dublin. And really during that time, it just became super obvious that like I wanted to do a startup. And so from there, it was just having some conversations with people that were really close and figuring out kind of like who was excited about it as well. And that's kind of how Vela started. Um, I think like why did we want to do a game startup? Jokingly it's because you love doing hard things. That's kind of the reason. But seriously, like it is simultaneously like the hardest job for good challenges. Like everybody has hard difficulties in their job, no matter what it is. Sometimes that can be relationships. Sometimes that can be like market success. Sometimes that can be just like the ambition. We have a lot of the good challenges. Like we will have a great team at Vela. And so we don't have those like relationship problems or like politics at work. But we have a lot of other things that we set out to do, which are super hard. And so it's by far the most difficult but rewarding job I've ever had. And it's not for everyone.
Mm.
Like I will just say that, and that's okay. Um, I think there's so much of an entrepreneur culture evolving, like especially in the last few years, where there's just like hordes of crazy talented teams with crazy amounts of money popping up like everywhere. And so I think, for us, it was really about the challenge and the ambition and wanting to like kind of just put ourselves to the test and just like learn as much as we could. Even after 20 years in games, like I learn new stuff like all the time. So don't do a game startup like to chase that crazy like entrepreneur news brief fantasy, because that's so surface level. Like it's just like we all put out these press releases and we all say stuff and like we're going to do another one in a couple weeks, right? And it's all true, but you have to put on the show, right? And so don't do it to put on the show. Do it because you love to do hard things, because you want to challenge yourself, because you want to learn at like a rate that you won't learn anywhere else. So that's kind of what, reflecting on it, like that's kind of what we all took on when we started Bella.
And that's really interesting what you're saying, and I'd even find it being an elder gentleman still in the games industry. I don't know what I'm doing. I think it's that thing that you never stop learning, and I think if you can, you know, that's and even listening to our earlier speaker, Damien,
Mm-hmm.
that it's an industry that keeps changing, and I think if you've that appetite for learning, um, so yeah, so Vela, like you've got your funding in place, and you've a team there. How's it going? And can you tell us anything about Project the Game?
Yeah, so Velo's been going really well. We joke a lot amongst ourselves that kind of at every turn we like to make it harder on ourselves for the decisions that we make. So we very much in the vein of what I was talking about earlier, we decided that we didn't want to work with publishers. And publishers are great, like no problem with publishers at all. It's just not for us. Like we want to have that direct relationship for players, and we don't want to pay someone a bunch of money for the privilege of doing it in a different way than we would ourselves. So that's really great to say, and it's good to put on like a poster and get people fired up. But publishers have a lot of money, right? And they're kind of the engine that keeps game development going. So we had to go out and raise studio investment funding. And as you mentioned, we self-funded at the beginning between myself and two co-founders. We actually did work with a local enterprise office where we got like a grant for like 30 grand, which was like the most exciting day we ever had, you know. Um, and then we've done two equity financing rounds. The first one was actually with uh, Dermot Desmond's IIU and Enterprise Ireland. And that was actually larger than the LVP round, which was last year in March. And that one actually came about more as an opportunity for us to work with LVP as opposed to us like needing a bunch of money. And it was one of those things where we got super lucky on, I think you have to get lucky as a startup a little bit, because we signed that deal and then 2 weeks later, like everybody went into lockdown, right? And
Okay.
so we knew that we had enough funding to kind of ride out whatever COVID threw at the game investment market, and turns out threw it on its head in a completely different way than everybody thought it would. But for that like first period after, we actually hired people during the pandemic, so we actually have grown uh, remotely, even though
Oh,
we're not a
perfect.
fully remote studio. So it's been going very well. We're actually up to 27 people in the studio now, which is really exciting. And we've actually, as I mentioned, we've got some big news coming out in the next couple of weeks. We'll actually be hiring a lot more over the next year. So for anybody in the audience, keep your eyes on our careers page. As far as the game itself goes, I can't talk about what we haven't publicly said already, but we are making a game in a new genre that we lovingly refer to as multiplayer online co-op, or MoCo for short. And it's a team-based game that really what we're trying to do is take the mastery of really deep competitive games, but rebuild them from the ground up with through the lens of positive social dynamics, right? So if anybody's ever played any competitive game in their life online, you've probably heard all the obscene things that your mother did, or you've had trolls, you've had people leave, right? And it's just such a normalized part of gaming, and it's awful. Like nobody wants to have fun and get yelled at for the thing that they love, and two, it's the number one reason why people stop playing games they actually really like. And so our vision has always been to build games that don't compromise on the skill and the depth and the quality of experience, but we rethink everything from the mechanics to the narrative premise to the way we build community to the technology in order to just make it so people have a more positive experience. And it doesn't mean like we all have to be best friends afterwards, but it just means like, can we actually play a game, have a meaningful experience, feel like we're doing something awesome and fun and learning together, and just not yell at each other and not want to just like log off instantly because it's an awful experience. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And we're not the only ones in that space. Um, but what we're doing with the game is taking it in the direction of, so that's kind of the super high level vision, but specifically kind of the space is we're taking kind of the best elements from a game like League, like a MOBA, so like the team play and the skill and the variety of characters and depth, and we're kind of putting that into, an MMO dungeon run or raid format, right? So you're actually going through a series of challenges, you're actually taking on a lot of different obstacles and enemies, and we're using a lot of other things in the background that go into a lot of depth and we need slides for and everything, but that's how it's going. We recently just completed our first pre-alpha test with our community. We've got a Discord up that's actually just kind of shot up overnight to about 9,000 people on our Discord, which we were hoping for like 500. We got about 9,000. And so really seeing a lot of excitement there. We're super excited about the early versions of the game that people have tested. It's all closed testing, but if you want, you can sign up on our website for the next testing window. So we're pretty excited. Of course, not everything goes well, but the major things, it's pretty hard to complain.
Cool. Sounds intriguing. I can't wait to see. You've got me sold anyway.
We're working as fast as we
I want
can
to
to
play
get
it.
it out as fast as we can.
Uh, yeah. So look, one thing there, which is great to hear that considering our audience that you're going to be taking on people. What would be your advice, for a recent graduate or a young developer, looking to get into Vela or similar companies?
Yeah,
What would be
sure.
your advice?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty interesting team in the sense that we're not always looking for people that have 20 years of industry experience. Like we have a mix, but we also have people who are a lot more inexperienced in the industry, but they're very exceptional at their craft, right?
Hmm.
And so, as an example, we have one of our environment artists, this guy named Troy, actually graduated here in Dublin, or sorry, graduated here in Ireland, moved to Malta, worked at a studio, came back to work with us. Just got a crazy passion for games, kind of does everything. He does environment at Vela, but is exceptionally talented and really passionate player. We have our senior concept artist and illustrator. Her name's Astri. If you've ever seen the Project V key art, she did that. And she's never worked in the games industry before. She was doing like paid commissions online and has like 100,000 followers on Instagram. And she's probably about the same age as a lot of the people in the audience here. And we just hired her straight in as a senior because she's so skilled at what she does and kind of her work mentality. Like I learn stuff from her all the time in terms of just work. So what I would say for the audience, what we look for at Vela is we look for what you can do, right? And so the biggest thing I can say is like make stuff. Right. If you're a game designer, like make games. If you're a programmer, like write code, like make games. It doesn't matter. If you're an artist, like make art. Right. And if it's something that you're really passionate about, and you're fortunate enough to get a job, like it's going to be a lot better than if you're stuck doing something you don't want to do. And so just put all your energy into making things. Right. The more things you make, the more you'll learn. And don't just make stuff and then throw it aside. Like make stuff and figure out like, well, what do I think is good about this? What do I not like about it? Like be really self-critical, because that's something we look for at Vela a lot. It's just like, we're not going to hire anybody who's not always thinking about how they can improve themselves, because that just has to start from within. And that goes all the way up from me all the way down to our newest hire. And so just make stuff and be critical.
Cool. Great. Listen, really good advice, Travis, and thank you so much for answering, my simple, brief questions. We do have a question from the audience, so let me just check here. So from Bernard Lillis, it's interesting to know why Travis is working without a publisher. What's wrong with publishers?
Hey, Bernard. As I said before, there's nothing wrong with publishers at all. In fact, I have a lot of good friends who work in publishing, at publishing operations, etc. We chose not to work with an outside publisher because we're very committed to kind of having and maintaining a direct relationship with our players. And so there's lots of different versions of like self-published. As I joked before, like we tend to make things harder on ourselves. So we're actually, we've kind of gone full route. And so, we're self-publishing, we do all of our own community. We're going to essentially do all of our own kind of marketing, distribution, et cetera. Like we're going to handle as much of that as possible. And that doesn't mean we're going to write every piece of code or, draw every marketing image ourselves. But essentially for us, it's about that accountability to players directly. Right. So like when something goes wrong with the experience, like how do we respond? How do we fix it? How do we make it better? When something's going right, how do we do more of it? How do we build like a direct connection with players? And to us, that's more than just talking on Discord to them. It's just kind of about every single touch point we want to be accountable for, because it's incredibly important to us. And it's not something that everybody needs to do at all. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it. I think we just have a lot of advantages because we've done it a lot, and a lot of us who've worked at Riot before and kind of the real nitty gritty of that know what it looks like and know what the challenges are. So we kind of know what we're getting into. But TLDR, there's nothing wrong with publishers at all. I would never say that. It's just not for us.
Sure, brilliant. Travis, listen, thank you so much. Great to hear the success with Vela. The game sounds fantastic. Can't wait to see it. And great to hear you're hiring as well. So for everybody in the audience, keep an eye on their website. So thanks again, Travis.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter, and have a great rest of the day.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.